Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Laura Hanson with Connect My Brain. Thank you so much for tuning in for another fabulous discussion about how children's brains get wired and all the different things that can impact them, impact their ability to pay attention, impact their ability to have expected emotional regulation, what impacts their ability to thrive and to really drive their brains to be everything that they're meant to be. We've been talking about attention. We spent 4 podcasts on the history of attention and then what is really happening with the brain when people have trouble paying attention, and what do we do here at CMB in order to really bring that brain back online. We did the same thing with dyslexia, and we talked about the history, and then we talked about the developmental journey that goes through with lateralization. So if you missed any of those podcasts, and you may have a child that is really struggling, and maybe you haven't found the answer yet, I really encourage you to go back, listen to those podcasts, and see if anything resonates with you about maybe you really can resolve the problem rather than label the problem. I am a huge proponent on looking at the developmental sequence and how our brains actually get wired. It seems as though traditional healthcare looks at the problem where it is and never thinks about the why. I have a few theories on that. Maybe sometime we can chat and I'll give you a couple of ideas that I have. But it really boils down to that we have a model of care that approaches something, gives it a diagnosis, and then if it's in this manual that says this is what we can do, XYZ, that seems to be the extent of it. And so many of these labels are listed as lifetime problems when I can tell you with all transparency that is just not true. I've been in practice for 28 years, and there are so many kids that we've literally turned around 180 degrees in order for them to get going in the right direction by looking at development. And this is so important to keep this in mind because I think we really miss the boat on assessing our children based on what they should be doing at the age that they are. And now we even have a greater hurdle because last year the CDC changed developmental milestones and seemed to push development back even further. And this is something I've noticed in the past, that there was this always wait and see mentality when you don't have to wait. If you understand child development, you know how to get in there and see what the problem is and begin to redirect the neurology. And you can do this at any age. You can do it with a baby. You can do it with a toddler. You can do it with a school age. You can do it with a teenager. And even you as an adult can turn things around. This is the whole idea behind neuroplasticity, meaning that if we give the brain and the body what it needs, and we're doing this at the right intensity and frequency, change will happen. Well, we automatically, I think of that term and the way that I just described it as that always means a positive outcome. But the same thing is true in going in the wrong direction. If you continue to practice the wrong direction, if you continue to wait, see, if you go, okay, now instead of walking at 12 months, we're going to say it's okay that you walk at 18. If we just keep pushing it further down the line, making all of this delay normal, what is going to happen to our world? And with so many things that are happening right now, I mean, this has just been very unprecedented times. And I just truly believe that who's getting the worst end of this is kids. Nobody is, well, people are standing up for them, but unfortunately, the ones that we really need to open their eyes and open their ears are just, they're going in such a um, off direction. And I see it. I see it all the time in my office. I've seen it for the last 28 years of all these kids, just their development is just being missed. So I'm continuing to go down a path of talking about some of these labels. And, you may have already gone in that direction to have your child diagnosed. And especially in both the attention and the dyslexic podcast, I really explain what's in the background of diagnoses and where all of this comes from and how it is regulated. But the bottom line is that it's placing our children under a canopy of diagnoses that are actually considered mental disorders. And you don't get to just drop that label off one day. You would literally have to go back to a person of equal standing, and they would have to then remove the diagnosis. My thought process is you can always add a diagnosis, but why not start looking at the blueprint of that child and seeing where there are red flags that would indicate that because of my development, I'm now struggling with, and you fill in the blank, struggling with attention, struggling with reading and writing, struggling with my emotions. So, for the next few podcasts, I'm going to talk about stress, anxiety, and PTSD. I put all three of those under the same canopy where there's definitely different pieces that can go in, but because we are principally speaking about children in this podcast, I'm going to keep those types of identifiers under one category, but it will take a few podcasts to get through all of the information. So today, what we're going to focus on is some of that developmental background for stress and anxiety. And principally, every now and then, I might be able to even give in a few tidbits on how it relates to PTSD. And then in the next couple of podcasts, I want to talk about what we know happens in the brain as a result of anxiety, because we have so many kids that are actually getting diagnosed with anxiety. And I'm talking about little kids, like ages 4 and 5. So the thought when you look at a child is that they're so close to the beginning that in order to really understand what might be going on, we have to consider the world around in which they were conceived. And one of the things that I've talked about in previous podcasts is young couples planning to have a child. We spend a lot of time planning a vacation or maybe even to participate in some type of athletic event. Well, what about manufacturing a life and looking at your own physiology? And there's been so many encounters where I have spoken to young mothers who are dealing with anxiety and have already seen this display in their children, and understanding that your state of health at the time of conception absolutely plays a part in the outcomes for your baby. And then we've got this incredible time when the subconscious is forming, which is the last part of pregnancy and going into about 7-8 years. And this is when our children are literally following us around like little acorns. And you are regulating them. Whatever you're going through, they are going through. Now, it doesn't mean that it always looks like apples to apples. No, in fact, it's usually like apples to oranges, because they don't have a point of reference to really know what you're going through. They're just actually sensing how you're feeling and what's going on in home life and what's going on between mom and dad and what's going on with the finances. And you might be dealing with all of those on the parent level, but there's a downwind of how you're moving through life and how you're handling all of those things. And it's hard. It's very hard. Lots of things that people go through are very hard. And the amount of stress that our culture has been through in the last 3.5 years and continuing to go through, there's a lot of stress. There's not a lot of margin. And when I talk about margin, my analogy that I like to use is like a piece of loose leaf. And we've got those red lines on the left-hand side, and we're not supposed to write on the left of that line. So that's called your margin. How much margin do you really have? Have you extended yourself all the way to the ends of both sides or both ends of that piece of paper? Or is there any flexibility? Is there any downtime? Though all of those things play a part in the dynamics, the harmony, the homeostasis for that child. And then the child has their own physiology. So, for example, what does stress and anxiety, where might it come from for a child? Again, so close to the beginning of their life. And if there is any kind of disruption going on, it will influence how certain things in their own physiology is going to respond. So when we talk specifically about stress, stress is not a bad word. We do need stress. We need to feel physically, mentally stressful things. If we never feel it, then we've never exercised it, and we're not able then to handle things that are coming at us. So that's one possibility. If a child has been sheltered from everything, that child will not know how to handle anything. So it is important to learn how to handle certain things, all within an age appropriate boundary. So it's not about sitting around and talking to your kids and telling them all the deep things that are going on, but it's also not making it seem like everything is fabulous when it really isn't. So there's a balance, and that's what we really mean by the word homeostasis. So you have you have an area of your physiology, your child has it, and it's called your autonomic nervous system. And that word autonomic is exactly what it means. It's automatic. So you're not telling yourself to breathe. You're not telling yourself to digest. You're not telling yourself to eliminate. You're not telling yourself to have a certain amount of blood pressure or how the black pupils in your eyes are going to respond. This is an automatic pilot. It has two parts or two responses. One is called the fight or flight. Now, many people have heard that term, fight or flight. Its proper name is the sympathetic nervous system. But fight or flight is literally our response. Number one, its primary action is if there is a threat that it's going to stimulate in order to either help you fight or run. But it isn't meant to be at that level all the time. When you need it to be there. So we also use the sympathetic nervous system for other physiological compartments, such as if I'm going to take my breath in, that's actually the sympathetic nervous system. So it not only creates that fight or flight, but it also has physiological daily function necessary for your body. And the same thing is true for parasympathetics, which is its counterpart. And parasympathetics is known as rest, feed, and breed. So it is the ability for your body to relax. It is the ability of your body to digest. And it is the ability of our bodies to be able to reproduce. So these two parts have primary responses, and then they have responses that are utilized all day long inside of our bodies. They're there for us. Okay, so where do these systems come from? Well, they are part of early development in the womb. So your fight or flight response is actually part of the primitive reflex known as the Moro reflex. Now, I talk a lot about primitive reflexes, and there are many podcasts available. So go back and listen. But primarily, the Moro reflex is going to literally create 3 working centers in that baby's body around 9 weeks of pregnancy. And that is arousal of the system, meaning that the system can come up and down, meaning that that system can come awake and go to sleep. Babies in the womb sleep, babies in the womb play. Think about how many times when you went to either see your midwife or your OB that they asked, do you feel that baby moving? So when we have a pregnancy where we're bedridden and we are not moving, we're not providing that feedback mechanism to the life growing inside that you need to move to. And typically those little ones like to start moving when you lay down to go to sleep. It also creates what's known as the CO2O2 reflex, meaning we have an innate monitor that's going to make sure that we have enough oxygen. And literally, the physiological movement of the Moro reflex is some startled movement, some sudden change in the environment, and the baby opens up and literally takes a big breath. So it's literally bringing in oxygen. When that baby takes its deep breath, as it exhales, it comes back into the fetal position very slowly. So the initiation of the inhale is quick, where the exhale is slow. This is actually the rhythm of what is called heart rate variability. And heart rate variability is how much variance do you have when you combine your breath and your heartbeat so that you can handle different situations at different levels and at different intensities. So, an example of that, when I take a breath in, my heart rate is going to go up. And my heart rate, maybe it goes up to 16 beats. And then as I exhale, that heartbeat will slow down. Then my next breath, inhale, maybe it only goes up to 10. And then exhale, it goes down. Just looking at 3 cycles only. When I take my third one, maybe it goes up to 18, and then it'll come back down when I exhale. So looking at the variance of the combination of heartbeat and breath means that something can come at me and bring my heart rate up to 16 and I'm okay. Something can come at me and my heart rate goes up to 10 and I'm definitely okay. And something can come at me and my heart rate goes up to 18 and I'm still okay. So there is variety in the intensity in each of those cycles, which is bringing back the ability for me to handle things, handle the stressor. If I do a test and I've only got more like a steady, maybe 6 to 8 beats on each cycle, then that means I got a very low level of intensity that I can handle before my bucket's going to tip. And heart rate variability is actually known as the gold standard of determining if there is cardiovascular stress going on. So this is a valuable tool that's actually been in your baby since 9 weeks of pregnancy. And that baby has been practicing it with you, establishing rhythm with you, and then born into the world, and then living with you. And that's how you can understand that our babies are really little acorns, and we do set a lot of that rhythm that is going to establish how they can handle things. The third thing that the Moro reflex activates is the sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight mechanism. So that baby in the womb at 9 weeks can have its own fight or flight response. And even in previous podcasts, I get very deep into explaining how babies are impacted by maternal health, maternal well-being while they're in the womb. And we've got to realize that that plays a part in how our baby is going to respond as it comes out into the world. And that's actually seen as the first few weeks of your baby's life. How is your baby? How did your baby sleep? Was your baby sleeping through the night at just a few weeks? That would be a red flag. It might be great for you, but it's not great for that baby. That baby is still trying to establish its new experiences as it comes into the world. So babies are supposed to be waking up about every 3 to 4 hours to feed. And when there's a sudden change driven by that Moro reflex, with the level of glucose available in the brain, the baby should arouse, startle, cry, and expect to be fed. This particular reflex is life promoting. It is training that baby to reach out and call for somebody when it needs something. And then how we are going to attend to that baby is also going to begin to set the rhythm of how that child's expectations will grow. And we talked about this very deeply when we were talking about the idea of attention and how attention is a developmental journey. So, this sympathetic nervous system is part of your early development in the womb. It also is part of the birth process. So, when we are born, the sympathetic nervous system is going to dominate the passage of the baby. However, it is going to act incredibly different, and it will never act like this again. Instead of stimulating everything, it actually quiets everything down and allows that child to have a transition. There's that word again. Moro, transition. So slowing it down and literally teaching how to go through a transition slowly and without interruption. So if we look back at the blueprint, what happened even during that stage? Was it a C-section? Was instruments used? Was it a very hard labor and delivery? Was it a very fast? There is an expected timeline. And for our first babies, it should take a longer period of time to have our babies. The more babies that we have, our body's already gone through it. So we have practice. And yes, we become more efficient. But it should never be a 30-minute ordeal. A baby needs that transition time. These will play a part in how this child will begin to adapt to its environment. And that's a very big part of child developmental screening. We look at fine motor, gross motor, social communication, and adaptation. How is that child actually adapting to this new environment? Is this child having a smooth transition? Is the family having a smooth transition? What else has been going on for either parent or baby or sibling or in the environment that could play a part in how that child will learn to self-regulate? The first 7.5 to 8 years, it's a very close connection to the parent. So that plays a huge part in the expectation or outcome. So when we think about these pieces, there are other entities such as emotional trauma for mom, trauma for baby, trauma in childhood. It's not all about just the conception, the pregnancy, the labor, the delivery. It's also life. What else is in the bucket that has played a part in how I'm able to regulate myself or not? These reflexes are the rudimentary place of all learning. And especially when there's trauma that has occurred, it can, and it will regress back into that brainstem where these reflexes live. And even if we had all of the best in pregnancy or conception, pregnancy, labor, delivery, If there is some type of trauma, and trauma can be physical and trauma can be mental, but we will regress back into our brainstem in order to relearn. And of course, I would love to say that that's always a perfect outcome, but it's not. It's all relative to what people are going through. And that's why it is so important to look at that blueprint and understand the journey that somebody has been on and how it would impact that individual. As an adult, if you had a heart attack, a stroke, a physical trauma from many different patterns, you too, even now, would go back into your brainstem in order to re-navigate the trauma and the new path that's set ahead. And some of these situations, like a heart attack and a stroke, and even something like a sexual encounter that has hurt someone, it could be years before you really are on the other side of it and having to work through not only the physical healing, but the mental healing that goes along with things. And you have to understand your physiology is receiving that feedback, and it literally is going to be part of your healing process. You will go back into your brainstem in order to re-navigate this path. So this is some foundational pieces as it relates to what might look like some mild stress, then maybe escalated over time, or trauma added to a situation that can then begin to lead into patterns, patterns of anxiety and even PTSD. So we will get into those brain patterns on our next podcast. But for now, what can you do about this? What do we do about this? Well, CMB really stands to do things, approach things from a very different perspective. While there's so many things that are known to help individuals, really creating an individual picture is so important. Therapies might look the same, but everybody's path is different. And it's very important to identify those red flags. That the intake form is what I always am referring to when I talk about the blueprint, because that is your child's story. That is your story. And your story, your child's story, is what has gotten you to this point today. And you may have found some relief in certain things, but if your child is still struggling, if you're still struggling, this is an approach where we look at the mechanical components of how the body should be wired together. We do brain mapping so that we can literally see what's going on in the brain as far as brain waves. Are they in the right place? Is the brain organized? Are the brain waves either overpowered or underpowered, over aroused, under aroused? And we look at the possible symptoms that can be associated with those patterns. And we help you look at those pieces so that you understand why your brain map is such an important part of your story, because it's matching what you're feeling, rather than thinking that you either can't change the pattern or that you're stuck like this. The brain can be temporarily stuck, but you can make a change. You can unstick it. But what it needs is practice. It needs real-time feedback that actually is telling it that it's going in the right direction. Now, you can combine this type of therapy with anything else that you're doing. It's never meant to be a standalone therapy anyway. And most of our adults here, they're combining neurofeedback with other type of therapies. Our children, we have a very well-rounded program that looks at their development, looks at their brain, and looks at their chemistry, because that is who we are all day long. We are a mechanical being, we have a brain, and we have a chemistry. And when you put all three together, the brain is ready to go in another direction. And that is what we can give you here at Connect My Brain. So please share this podcast. Feel free to call us at the office, 678-501-5172. You're welcome to go to the website, go to the Contact Us, fill out the form, let me know when you're available, and I will be happy to give you a call. And for now, we'll see you next time, and be blessed.